You don't belong in our family photos, Sophie. These are for people who matter. The words slipped out of Amber so lightly that for a second I wondered if I imagined them. But the room heard. The soft chatter in the living room tapered into a slow hush, like everyone was holding their breath without meaning to. I stood there with the serving tray in my hands, watching the way a few smiles froze on faces that didn't know where to look. My fingers tightened around the edge of the tray, and I forced my eyes to stay calm even though something inside me flinched hard. Amber didn't blink. She just smoothed her dress and waited for someone to laugh with her, as if she had pointed out a tiny scheduling mistake instead of cutting me down in the middle of my own mother's living room. Daniel didn't say a word. He glanced at me once, then looked away, pretending he had to fix the cuff of his shirt. My mother gave a small laugh that died too quickly. She tried to wave it off with a quiet, "Let's just take the picture." But I could hear the strain in her voice. I stood still, letting the moment sit there without rushing to fill it or soften it. That silence always said more about me than anything they claimed to know. I swallowed slowly and reminded myself to breathe. I told myself to focus on the tray, on not dropping anything, on not letting the heat rush too visibly up my neck. I've learned that when someone wants to embarrass you, reacting only gives them something to hold. So I stayed quiet. Inside, though, a tiny ache opened the way an old bruise does when someone presses too hard. My name is Sophie Nate. I am 34 years old, an administrative coordinator who keeps other people's lives organized, while mine always seems to fall behind theirs. I'm the one who shows up early to help with the cooking, the cleaning, the decorations, the one who holds a tray instead of a glass, the one who steps aside so others can shine. And in moments like this, I feel every small way I've been treated like a background extra in my own family. I set the tray down on the nearest table and stepped back to give them space. I told myself it was because I didn't want to ruin their picture with my presence. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't stand in that frame knowing they didn't want me there. It's strange how quiet cruelty can be when it comes from people who are supposed to care. It's a soft thing, a familiar thing, the kind that blends into the wallpaper until you realize you have been breathing it in for years. I moved toward the hallway, giving them a polite smile that didn't reach my chest. I thought I heard someone exhale once the camera clicked. I was almost around the corner when Daniel's voice drifted after me. "My sister won't be at the wedding. Don't worry." His tone was casual, almost bored, as if he were crossing off a small errand. My steps slowed, and for a moment I couldn't tell if the heaviness in my stomach was anger or disappointment. Maybe both, maybe neither. Maybe it was just the feeling of being erased while standing in the next room. I leaned against the doorway and closed my eyes for half a second, letting my breath settle in my chest. I wondered when it became normal for me to be left out of things without question, when I started accepting it as a reasonable outcome instead of a wound. I used to think families were supposed to at least pretend they cared, but mine had learned to hide their jolts of cruelty inside little polite sentences that slipped under the skin before I could shield myself. I made my way to the kitchen, pushing the swinging door softly so it wouldn't make noise. The counter lights were warm, bright enough to keep me awake inside my own thoughts. I gripped the edge of the sink and let myself breathe in the quiet. A moment later, the question formed in my mind before I could stop it. If I don't matter here, then where do I matter? It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a small whisper, the kind you barely admit to yourself even while saying it. But it felt true. I stood there, trying to steady my voice inside my own chest, when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, intentional, moving across the tile with a purpose I could feel before I turned. My shoulders tightened just a little, and I straightened without meaning to. I didn't look back yet. Sometimes the smallest moment can change everything, and I knew somehow this was one of those moments where something shifts before the mind has time to name it. And I waited, listening, as the footsteps came closer. "I'm not them, Sophie. You know that." Zara's voice came soft behind me, steady in a way that made my shoulders loosen without meaning to. I turned and saw her leaning against the doorway, watching me with that calm look she always carried. She didn't rush closer, but the concern in her eyes made the space between us feel smaller. She stepped in and asked, "Why do you let them talk to you like that?" There was no judgment in her tone, just a quiet ache that mirrored something deep inside me. I gave her a small smile, the kind people use when they want to keep a wall up without being rude, and said, "I'm used to it." Even as the words left my mouth, they felt heavier than they used to. I picked up a plate from the sink to rinse it, just so I had something to look at besides her face. Zara didn't move. She stayed close enough that I could feel her presence, but far enough that I didn't feel crowded. I loved her for that. She had always known how to read my silence. "Used to, it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt," she said quietly. She wasn't wrong. I held the plate under warm water and watched the soap run off in thin lines. I told myself I didn't owe anyone an explanation, yet the truth still rose in my chest. "It's easier this way," I said. "Less conflict." It sounded tired. It sounded small. And I hated that. I sounded like that, even if it was honest. As I stood there washing dishes that no one else had bothered to touch, memories came in slow waves. They weren't loud or dramatic. They were the kind that settle in you over years, layering until they feel like part of your bones. I remembered school award nights when Daniel won something, and my parents clapped so hard my ears rang, then turned to me with a simple nod when I walked on stage for a certificate. I remembered family dinners where I moved around the kitchen like extra hands while everyone else talked and laughed, my own plate growing cold on the counter. I remembered birthdays when Daniel got cameras or new bikes, and I got a sweater they forgot to wrap. Small things, quiet things, the kind that don't seem like much when they happen, but they add up until you start expecting less from everyone around you. I put another plate on the drying rack and let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Zara watched me carefully. "They act like Daniel is the sun," she said. "Everything just spins around him." I smiled a little, not because it was funny, but because it was true. My family always had this unspoken rule. Daniel was the golden one. He married the right kind of woman. He earned the right amount of money. He carried the family name with the kind of pride they liked. And I was the one who worked quietly, lived quietly, and made myself convenient. I never challenged it because I thought this was what family was supposed to feel like. Predictable, uneven, familiar. I felt a soft ache rise in my chest as I rinsed out a bowl, because part of me still wondered why I stayed in these rooms when I always walked away feeling smaller than when I entered. I told myself it was loyalty, or maybe hope that something would change. But tonight something felt different. Something inside me was shifting in a slow, tired way, like a thread being pulled loose one tug at a time. I heard Amber's laugh float in from the hallway, sharp and clear. Then her voice followed, lighter than it had any right to be. "I swear, she's still single, still renting, still dressing like a teacher," she said to whoever she had on the phone. Her tone was playful but deliberate, the kind that made sure her words landed even if she pretended she didn't mean anything by them. I froze for a moment, letting the sting move through me without trying to block it. Zara's eyes found mine, and I could see her jaw tighten. "She really said that?" she asked. I nodded once and looked back at the running water. "It's fine," I said, even though it wasn't. I had learned long ago that responding only made me look defensive, and staying quiet felt safer, even if it left marks inside me that no one else noticed. I wiped my hands on a small towel and stepped away from the sink. I didn't want Zara to worry, but she already was. She rested a hand on my arm and said, "You deserve better than this." There was something about the way she said it, simple and honest, that made my throat tighten. I didn't argue. I didn't shrug it off. I just nodded because it was the only truth I had the energy to hold. When I walked back to the living room to say goodbye, no one looked up at first. My mother was scrolling through her phone. My father was half watching the muted TV. Even Amber didn't notice me standing there. I said, "I'm heading out," with a quiet tone that should have been enough for anyone who cared. But my mother didn't turn, not even a glance. A small part of me had hoped she would lift her head. She didn't. I reached for the door when Daniel's voice cut in. "Sophie, wait," he said. I stopped, hand on the knob. He walked toward me with a flat look I couldn't read. "We need to talk soon," he said. "About the wedding." His voice held something I couldn't place. I felt a soft weight settle in my chest as I nodded once. Something was coming. I could feel it in the space between his words and his eyes. And I stood there for a moment, knowing the next thing he said might shape everything that came after. Daniel called the next morning while I was still sitting on the edge of my bed, trying to convince myself to start the day. I stared at his name on the screen for a moment before picking up. His voice came out stiff, almost rehearsed, like he had practiced the words in front of a mirror. "I need to say something, Sophie," he began. I didn't answer right away. I just let the silence sit between us, because sometimes silence shows more truth than questions ever do. Then he took a breath and said, "You're not invited, Sophie. Amber doesn't want you there. She says you take attention away when you get emotional." His words landed in a slow, heavy way, like they had been waiting for the right moment to finally fall. I didn't speak. I didn't react. I held the phone a little closer, as if hearing it clearly would help me understand it better. He must have mistaken my quiet for confusion because he rushed on. "It's not personal. We're just trying to have a smooth day, you know? Family unity, good energy. And you, well, sometimes you throw things off." The way he said it was gentle, almost soft, as if he thought softening the tone would hide the sharpness underneath. But I felt every part of it. I felt how easily he trimmed me out of his life, how natural it was for him to place me outside the frame. I looked around my small apartment while he talked. The morning light came through my thin curtains in soft stripes, touching the laundry I hadn't folded yet. It struck me how peaceful my space was compared to the weight in his voice. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, keeping my tone steady. I didn't ask why. I didn't plead for a place that was never really mine. I didn't give him any reaction he could use later. I ended the call before he had the chance to justify himself. Again. I knew he would try. He always did, as if explaining cruelty made it less cruel. After the call, I sat still for a moment. Stillness has its own sound, the kind that fills a room when your heart is trying to understand something you've heard too many times. I folded a shirt that had been sitting on the bed since yesterday. My hands moved without thinking, neatly pressing each sleeve into place. I realized how often I use small tasks to quiet heavier thoughts: folding, cleaning, organizing, movements that made me feel useful even when the world around me did not. When I walked to work later, the air felt tight around me. I moved through the sidewalks with a strange awareness of how light my footsteps sounded. At the office, I listened to coworkers talk about their families, their weekend plans, their little traditions. One woman said her sister always called first thing in the morning to check on her before big days. Another shared how her parents insisted on taking a full family photo at every gathering so no one felt left out. I smiled along with them, even though the words nudged something deep in me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't jealous. I was just tired. Tired in a way that felt old and familiar. As I walked back home in the evening, I kept thinking about how easily I had accepted scraps my whole life. When someone offered a small seat, I took it. When someone gave me a half-hearted compliment, I nodded like it was enough. When someone dismissed me, I told myself they were tired or stressed. I protected everyone except myself. Somewhere along the years, I had stopped asking what I deserved and started accepting whatever they handed me. I sat on my couch that night and let my thoughts settle. My apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels safe and lonely at the same time. In that quiet, I thought about my grandmother. She was the only person who ever looked at me like I was enough without needing to prove anything. She had a gentle firmness that made you feel held even when life felt sharp. I remembered how she used to cup my face in her palms when I was young and say, "You see more than they think, sweetheart. Don't let that make you smaller." She had been gone for years, yet her voice still lived somewhere in the soft corners of my memory. There was one moment with her I never forgot. I was 16, sitting at her kitchen table after another family argument that left me quiet and small. She handed me a small envelope and said, "Don't open this until you truly need clarity." I didn't understand what she meant then, but the seriousness in her eyes kept me from opening it out of curiosity. I tucked it away and carried it through moves, jobs, and apartments, like a tiny secret I wasn't ready to face. Tonight, something felt different. Something in me needed that clarity she spoke about. Maybe it was the way Daniel's voice had sounded like he was delivering a harmless message instead of cutting ties. Maybe it was how natural it felt for him to say I wasn't wanted. Or maybe it was the way I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I didn't beg. I just listened. And something in that silence woke up. I went to my bedroom drawer to put away a pair of socks, and my hand brushed against something familiar, the corner of an old envelope. I paused, feeling my breath catch in my chest. My grandmother's handwriting was still clear on the front. I touched the paper gently, tracing my finger along the edge like it might slip away if I pressed too hard. My hand trembled as I lifted it from the drawer. For the first time, I felt ready to know what she had left for me. I sat on the edge of my bed with the envelope resting in my palm. The paper felt older than I remembered, soft around the corners. The ink of my grandmother's handwriting slightly faded, but still steady. My fingers shook a little as I slid my thumb under the seal. I wasn't sure if I was opening a memory or a warning. When the flap gave way, something inside me felt like it opened with it. I unfolded the letter slowly. Her handwriting filled the page in small, careful lines. The first sentence made my breath catch. "If you are reading this, sweetheart, it means you have reached a moment where truth matters more than comfort." I closed my eyes for a second, letting her voice settle in. I could almost hear her saying it, gentle and firm at the same time. I kept reading because stopping would only make the ache sharper. She wrote about a family property I barely remembered. A small house on the edge of town that belonged to her parents long before I was born. I knew it existed, but I never knew it had anything to do with me. Then she said the words that felt like a quiet earthquake. "This home is yours, Sophie. I left it to you for your future and your independence. I wanted you to have a place where you felt safe." My eyes moved across the page, even though my mind was struggling to follow. Then the truth came like slow, heavy stones falling into place. She explained that Daniel had pushed my parents to redirect the property into his name years ago. He told them I wouldn't know what to do with it. He said I didn't need stability the way he did. He said I couldn't manage anything on my own. She found out too late to stop them, but she created a legal backup, a notarized document that transferred the house fully to me. She wrote that she wanted to make sure I had something no one could take. I sat still, holding the letter with both hands because my body felt too light to trust. I had spent years believing the worst wounds in my family were emotional, buried in small comments and quiet dismissals. But this was different. This was planned. This was deliberate. This was them deciding my future didn't matter as much as his. I felt something break quietly inside me, but right behind that crack came something stronger. A kind of clarity I had never allowed myself to feel. I reached into the envelope again and found a second sheet. The notarized document, my name written clearly, my grandmother's signature, the date. I traced the lines with my finger because I needed to feel the truth as much as I needed to read it. All those moments I thought I was imagining the imbalance in my family flashed through my mind. I had never been the lesser sibling by accident. They had chosen it. They had made decisions behind closed doors and expected me to smile in the background as if nothing belonged to me anyway. I opened my laptop and typed the address into the browser. A photo popped up, small and slightly blurry, but enough to feel real. A modest little house with a pale porch and a tree leaning over the left side. It wasn't big. It wasn't fancy. But it was mine. I scrolled through the estimated value and felt my chest tighten. It wasn't wealth, but it was safety. A safety net I never knew existed. A quiet piece of ground where I could finally plant myself without needing permission. I closed the laptop and sat on my bed, letting my hands rest in my lap. The room felt different, like the air had shifted into something I could finally breathe. I thought about all the years I blamed myself for not being enough, all the years I accepted scraps in silence because I believed that was my role. I thought about every time I told myself Daniel just had more going on, or my parents were just overwhelmed, or Amber didn't mean her comments the way they sounded. And now I knew the truth. They hadn't just dismissed me emotionally, they had taken from me. They had hidden things from me. They had done it with certainty, trusting I would never question anything. My grandmother's words stayed in my chest like a small, steady flame. Truth matters more than comfort. I realized I had spent my life choosing comfort for them instead of truth for myself. And now that I knew the truth, I couldn't pretend not to. I set the letter on my pillow and leaned back against the wall. The room was quiet, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready for but needed. I thought about Daniel's voice telling me I wasn't invited to the wedding. I thought about Amber's smirk. I thought about my mother not lifting her head when I said goodbye. And now I thought about the house with my name on it, waiting for me like a truth they never expected me to find. I must have drifted into a light sleep because when I opened my eyes, the room was dim and the letter was still by my side. I picked it up again just to feel its weight. I knew my grandmother wanted me to find strength in this moment. I could feel it in every line she had written. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. I pressed play and listened to my mother's familiar voice. "Sophie, we need to talk. Daniel needs that property now. We hope you understand." Her tone was calm, almost casual, but every word sliced through the air in a way that told me exactly what they expected, and exactly what they still believed I would do. I drove to my parents' house with the voicemail still echoing in my head. My mother had said it so calmly, as if asking me to hand over something that never belonged to me. When I walked through the door, they were already sitting in the living room like they had been waiting for me. My father nodded toward the couch and said, "Sit down for a minute, Sophie." His tone was soft, almost gentle, but I felt the weight behind it. I sat because I needed to hear exactly how far they were willing to go. My mother leaned forward with her hands folded in her lap. "We want to talk about the house," she said. She spoke as if she were introducing a normal topic, nothing emotional or heavy. I looked at her and stayed quiet. Sometimes silence makes people show who they really are. She took that silence as an invitation to continue. "Daniel and Amber want to start their family in a decent place. That house would make things easier for them." My father nodded along, keeping his voice even. "They need stability right now. You know how important that is." I listened without reacting because I wanted them to reveal every layer of their thinking. My mother added, "You live simply. You do fine on your own. You do not need a property sitting there doing nothing." She smiled as if this was a practical solution, not a request to erase me again. I kept my tone soft because softness unsettles people who expect quick agreement. "You think I do not need it?" I said. My mother nodded immediately. "Exactly. You have no family to support. You have your job. You manage well. This is for the family." The way she said family felt like a door closing on me. I watched them for a long moment. I saw the certainty in their eyes. They were not asking. They were expecting. Inside me, something warm started rising. Not hot, not wild, just warm. A steady heat meeting the clarity I had been carrying since reading my grandmother's letter. They had made choices behind my back. They had shaped my life without my knowledge, and they were still doing it, without hesitation. The front door opened and Amber walked in like she had every right to join the conversation. She did not even greet me. She stood with her purse on her shoulder and said, "We should get the paperwork started soon. The wedding is close, and I do not want any loose ends." Her voice was smooth, polite on the surface, but I heard the strain under it. She turned to me as if we were discussing something small. "It is better for everyone if the house is in Daniel's name. You know how he handles things. You do not need that kind of responsibility. I felt the warmth in my chest settle deeper. Not boiling, not rushing, just steady. She moved closer and lowered her voice like she was offering wisdom. Look, you live a simple life. Nothing wrong with that. But Daniel and I are building a future. And I do not want a reminder of poverty sitting in the middle of it. She said it like she was letting me in on a secret, like she expected me to agree for the sake of peace. My father cleared his throat. We all want what is best for the family. My mother added, this will help them start strong. I sat there looking at the three of them and felt each word fall into place. They were not hiding their intentions. They believed I would fold. They believed my quiet meant weakness, not choice. I gave them a small, calm nod. I hear you, I said. Their bodies relaxed at the same time, as if they had won something. I let that moment sit for a breath before adding, I need time to think. The room froze. No one expected me to say that. My mother blinked. My father frowned. Amber looked at me like I had broken a rule no one ever wrote down. They waited for me to take it back, but I did not. I stood up slowly. Thank you for telling me how you feel, I said, keeping my tone steady. I will reach out when I am ready. My father tried to argue with a small shake of his head, but the words never formed. My mother looked disappointed, not surprised. Amber looked annoyed. Not one of them asked what I wanted. I walked toward the door, and a thought rose in my mind without warning. People can rewrite someone's worth so easily. If you let them, they will shape you into the smallest version of yourself and call it love. I opened the door and felt a tightness loosen inside me. I wondered how many others had been told that their needs did not matter, that their voice was extra, that their place in the family was conditional. I wondered how many people watching would recognize this same slow erasing of self. Before I could step outside, I heard Amber whisper behind me. Her voice was low but clear enough to cut through the room. If she refuses, we will handle it another way. I stopped with my hand on the door. My heart stayed calm, but my spine stiffened. They were ready to take what was mine, even if I did not give it willingly. And in that quiet moment, I understood exactly what I was up against. I drove home with Amber's whisper still circling in my head. It clung to the quiet inside my car, settling into the spaces where my breath should have been. By the time I reached my apartment, the day felt heavier than it should have. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, and the small familiar space felt different, like it sensed something in me had shifted. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment. For the first time, I did not try to shake off the ache. I let it sit with me. I walked to the couch and sat down slowly, feeling the hollow part of my chest settle into place. I had spent decades dodging conflict just to keep the peace, in a family that never cared about mine. I had learned to stay quiet, to make myself small, to smooth out moments that cut me. Tonight, I felt every one of those moments return. Not loud, but steady. I let the loneliness wash over me without shoving it aside. I let it show me how many years I had filled silence with excuses, how many times I had chosen their comfort over my dignity. I rested my elbows on my knees and ran my fingers through my hair. I felt alert in a strange way, like my body finally understood what my mind had been afraid to admit. They were not confused. They were not stressed. They were not unaware. They were intentional. They believed I would bend because I always had. And that belief sat in me, with a quiet sting that did not disappear. There was a soft knock at my door, gentle enough that I knew it was Zara. I let her in, and she stepped inside with that calm expression she always brought when she sensed I needed someone. She looked at my face for half a second and shook her head. Tell me they did not push you again. I gave her a tired smile. You already know the answer. She sat beside me, close enough for warmth, but not close enough to press. You cannot give them the house, Sophie. You know that, right? I stared at my hands before answering. I know, I am just scared of the fight that comes with saying no. She nodded softly. Of course you are. Anyone would be. but being tired of losing is not fear. It is clarity. Her voice was steady, like she already saw something in me I had not accepted yet. I felt my throat tighten at her words. I whispered, "I am tired, Zara. I am so tired." She rested her hand on my arm. Good, because tired people stop agreeing to be stepped on. When she left later that night, I sat by my window with the lights off. I watched the empty street below and listened to the quiet hum of my building. The loneliness felt different now. It still hurt, but it also felt honest. It felt like something I needed to face in order to move forward. I thought about the property, about the letter, about the calm tone my parents used when they tried to take it. I realized I was not afraid of conflict itself. I was afraid of losing the little bit of place I thought I held in the family. But that place had never been real. It had been conditional. The next morning, I woke up to 3 messages. Not from my family, from people I barely spoke to. One said, "I heard you are making Daniel's wedding harder than it needs to be. Are you okay?" Another said, "Your mom mentioned you are jealous. Just wanted to check in." The worst one was from an old coworker who still lived in town. "People are saying you are being difficult on purpose. Hope things settle." I sat on the edge of my bed reading those words one after another. I felt the familiar sting of humiliation rise, but this time it didn't take over. I could see the pattern clearly. They were setting a story before I could speak. They were making me the problem so that refusing them would look unreasonable. They were painting themselves as the victims of my boundaries. For the first time, I didn't crumble. Under it, I just felt calm. A quiet kind of calm that came from finally understanding the shape of the fight. They were not just trying to take the property. They were trying to take the right to my own story. And I had spent too long accepting the version of me they liked to repeat. This time, I would decide what I allowed to be true. I opened my notebook and made a list of what I needed to handle. Not dramatic steps, small steps. Information, documents, clarity. I was not planning revenge. I was planning protection. My story, my voice, my rights. It felt strange to see it in writing, but also grounding. I felt something in me steady the moment the pen touched the page. I realized I had been preparing for this quietly for years without knowing it. In the afternoon, I stood in my kitchen with a cup of tea staring out the window. The day looked calm, almost still, but inside me something kept moving. Not fear, not anger, something like resolve, something that made my breath feel fuller in my chest. I knew they would not let this go. I knew I would face more pressure. But I did not feel small anymore. As the sun started to set, my phone buzzed on the counter. A single text lit up the screen. "We are coming tomorrow to finalize things." I stared at it and felt the calm inside me settle into place, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. They showed up right on time, just like the text promised. I heard their steps in the hallway before the knock even came. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there with a stiff smile and a folder tucked under his arm. Amber stood beside him with her purse held tight, her confidence showing before she even spoke. I stepped aside to let them in, and they walked into my living room like they were entering a meeting they expected to run. Daniel didn't waste a second. He set the folder on my coffee table and said, "We brought the documents. It will make things easier if you sign today." His tone carried the same calm pressure he used when he wanted something. He sat down and folded his hands like he was offering me guidance instead of taking something from me. Amber moved around slowly, looking at my place with the kind of judgment she didn't bother hiding. "This is really for the best," she said. "We're giving you a chance to help the family. It's a responsibility you should honor." She smiled like she was teaching a lesson. I watched the way her lips tightened around the edges. Even her kindness felt rehearsed. I sat across from them and kept my voice level. "I want to understand something," I said. Daniel lifted his eyebrows, ready to explain the plan again. I held his gaze and asked, "Why didn't anyone tell me the property was mine?" The question landed like a dropped glass. Daniel froze. His expression shifted first to confusion, then to something closer to guilt. Amber opened her mouth before he could answer. Oh, come on, Sophie, you know why. It made sense for Daniel to handle it. You wouldn't have known what to do with it. She said it casually, like she was pointing out a missing grocery item. I felt a tightness in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I stayed quiet and waited for Daniel to speak. He sighed and rubbed his forehead. Look, it wasn't personal. We thought keeping it simple was best. You didn't need that kind of weight. And the house, well, it would have been wasted on you. His voice tried to stay calm, but I heard the slip in it, the small crack of someone who knows they crossed a line. I nodded slowly, as if I were absorbing something new, even though I had already learned the truth. I hear you, I said. That helps me understand your choices. They relaxed for half a second, thinking I was agreeing. I let the moment breathe before I added, and I'm keeping the house. Amber blinked. Daniel sat up straight. He pushed the folder closer to me. Sophie, you're not listening. This isn't about ownership. This is about doing the right thing. His voice tightened. This is about family. Amber crossed her arms. You're being dramatic. We're asking for something reasonable. I kept my tone steady because steady unsettles people who depend on your hesitation. I am listening, I said, and I'm keeping it. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't move. I just sat there in the quiet I had earned. Their reaction didn't explode outward. It folded inward, sharp and cold. Daniel's voice rose just enough to sound worried instead of angry. You're making this harder than it needs to be. You always do this. Amber gave a small laugh with no warmth. She likes to feel important. This is her way of getting attention. I felt each jab, but they didn't land the way they used to. Something stronger was holding me up now. My father's voice echoed in my memory, telling me I should stay out of the way. My mother's silence drifted through my thoughts like a familiar draft. I straightened my back and kept my breathing slow. I wasn't fighting, I wasn't defending. I was choosing. Daniel leaned toward me. Sign it, Sophie. Let's move on. No one needs to be upset. The irony almost made me smile. I looked at him and said, If you're upset, that belongs to you. His face hardened just a little, like he wasn't used to hearing his own behavior handed back to him. Amber's patience snapped. Her voice came out sharp, slicing through the room. Fine. Then hear this clearly. You aren't invited to the wedding until you fix this. She spit the words out like she expected them to scare me. Daniel shot her a quick look, but he didn't correct her. That silence told me everything. I felt calm settle in my chest. Not cold, not angry, just certain. Good, I said. The simplicity of it surprised even me. It left no room for argument, no space for guilt. It was a door quietly closing. Daniel's hand tightened around the papers until the edges bent. His jaw clenched. Amber looked at me like I had betrayed a script she wrote herself. The air in the room shifted, thick and tense, wrapping around all three of us. I stood slowly. Thank you for coming, I said. They stared at me, confused by the calm. I opened the front door and waited. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. They only looked at me as if something they relied on had finally disappeared. The tension hung there, like a held breath. And for the first time in my life, I didn't break it for them. After they left, the quiet in my apartment stayed heavy in the air, like their voices had pressed the walls inward. I sat for a moment, letting the door's click settle into my body. I thought I would feel shaken. I thought I would feel small. But what surprised me most was the stillness inside me. It was steady, almost warm, like something had finally aligned after being bent for too long. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I even reached the kitchen. A long message from Daniel waited on the screen, the kind filled with excuses, gentle accusations, and lines meant to make me doubt myself. He wrote, I don't know why you're doing this. You're hurting the family. Then he added, You're pushing me into a bad position. I read it twice, not because it confused me, but because it was so familiar. It was the same tone he used whenever he wanted something and didn't want to look unkind asking for it. I didn't reply. Something in me knew silence said more than explanations ever could. A little later, another buzz. Amber had posted a story online, a picture of wedding invitations scattered on a table with a caption that read, "Some people love drama more than family." She didn't say my name, but she didn't need to. I recognized the move. She wanted an audience to believe her version before I had a chance to speak mine. For years, that would have broken me. Today, I just set the phone down and exhaled. Their noise didn't feel as sharp anymore. It felt like wind hitting a closed window. I could hear it, but it couldn't reach me. That afternoon, I drove out to the old property. The house sat back from the road, partly hidden by a tall tree that leaned gently toward the porch. It wasn't grand, but it had a quiet strength to it. I walked up the small steps and unlocked the door. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and something familiar. Maybe the last trace of my grandmother's perfume that lived in the walls longer than anyone expected. The floors creaked softly under my weight. Light came in through the windows in warm stripes, falling across the worn wooden boards. I felt a calm spread through my chest, deeper than anything I had felt in weeks. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't in a place where I needed to shrink or apologize. I walked room to room, touching the walls gently, imagining the life this house once held. I spent hours cleaning, washing the dust from corners that had been neglected. I opened windows and let fresh air move through. At one point, I found an old tin box in a drawer with buttons, small notes, and a photograph of my grandmother holding me when I was little. Her smile in that picture looked soft but full, as if she had known I would come back here one day needing this exact place. While I was sweeping the small porch, a neighbor from across the road walked over. Her name was Donna. She remembered my grandmother well. She told me stories about her kindness, how she baked extra pies for families going through hard times, how she always spoke about me with a look of pride. "She said you were the one who would surprise everyone one day," Donna said, smiling gently. I felt something warm bloom in my chest at that. It felt like a hand resting on my shoulder, steadying me. I painted the living room walls a soft pale color she would have loved. Each stroke felt like uncovering a piece of myself I had forgotten. I wasn't fixing the house just for practicality. I was restoring something in me, something that had been dimmed by years of being overlooked. When I finally drove back home, the sky had turned a muted blue. I felt tired, but not in the painful way. It was the kind of tired that comes after doing something that matters. I walked into my apartment and set my keys down when my phone buzzed again. It was another message from Daniel, short this time. "Sign the papers or you won't be part of this family." I stared at the screen. The words didn't sting. They didn't even surprise me. They just confirmed something I had been circling for days. I realized his threat wasn't really a threat at all. You cannot be removed from a place you were never truly allowed to belong. I sat on the edge of my bed and pictured the house again. The soft light in the living room. The quiet strength in its walls. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of belonging that didn't depend on anyone's approval. I felt grounded, yosi, seen, not by people but by the life I was reclaiming. I murmured to myself, barely above a whisper. Maybe family isn't people who claim you. Maybe it's people who don't take from you. The words settled in the room like they had been waiting for me to say them, and for the first time, I believed them. I woke up before the sun, the room still dim and quiet, and for a moment I just lay there listening to my own breath. I felt the weight of the coming day settle in my chest. Not heavy, but solid. I knew I needed to stop guessing and make sure every piece of my grandmother's gift was protected. I sat up slowly, reached for the small box I kept in my drawer, and placed it on my bed. Inside were the papers she had left me, each one tucked carefully in its envelope. I spread them out one by one, reading every line: the notarized transfer, her handwritten letter, the copy of the county filing, documents that proved she had thought this through, long before I ever knew there was anything to protect. I felt a quiet ache rise in my throat. For years, I believed no one had ever chosen me. Yet here she was, choosing me even after she was gone. I gathered everything into a folder and drove to a local lawyer whose name Donna had given me. He was older, steady-voiced, kind-eyed. I sat across from him while he reviewed every paper slowly, his finger tracing signatures, his brow lowering with concentration. My heart beat faster than I expected, not out of fear, but out of the need to finally hear the truth out loud. When he finished, he looked at me with a calm certainty. "You own the property fully," he said. "No one can pressure you into giving it up. Your grandmother protected you well." The relief washed through me so gently, I almost didn't notice it at first. Then it settled, warm and sure, like a candle lighting in my chest. I thanked him quietly, and he nodded as if he understood more than I had said. Driving home, I felt a mix of sadness and clarity. I kept thinking about how long I had accepted being the person who didn't get chosen, the one expected to step aside, the one who stayed silent so others could stay comfortable. And here I was, holding proof that someone saw me differently. Someone believed I deserved stability, a future, something of my own. When I got home, I set the folder on my table and made myself a cup of tea. I sat with it for a long while, letting the steam warm my face. Then I opened a notebook and began writing everything I remembered from the past days. The call from Daniel, the pressure from my parents, Amber's comments, the way their voices had carried that tone that said I was unreasonable simply for wanting what was mine. I wrote calmly, line after line, not to accuse anyone, but to sort out the truth inside me. By the time I finished, the sun had moved across the window, and my tea had gone cold. I looked at my notes and felt something shift. This wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't even anger. It was clarity, a kind of quiet strength that made everything feel simple. My phone buzzed. Another message from Daniel. "Tomorrow, you choose, family or selfishness." I stared at the words for a long moment. A part of me still felt that old sorrow, the one that always woke up when he used family as a lever. But it wasn't pulling me the way it used to. Instead, it made me realize how often they had used that word to shape me into someone who served their needs. I placed the phone face down on the table and let the silence settle. It wasn't a cold silence. It was thoughtful, honest. I took a deep breath and felt my ribs expand slowly. Moments like this used to make me feel guilty, as if protecting myself meant I was doing something wrong. But I wondered now how many people out there had lived the same way, trying to hold on to a place that only hurt them. I wondered how many had reached a point where choosing themselves felt like betrayal, even though it was the first step toward healing. If they were listening, I hoped they could feel the shift with me. As evening came, I put the documents back in the drawer with care. I washed my face, changed into something comfortable, and tried to rest, but my mind kept circling around the same thought. They weren't fighting for me. They were fighting for control. My grandmother must have known this would happen, or at least feared it. Maybe that's why she had put everything in writing. A little after 9, I heard a soft sound at my door. Not a knock, more like paper sliding across the floor. I walked over and opened it. No one was there. I looked down and saw a wedding announcement card. I picked it up slowly, turned it over, and felt my chest tighten. My name had been printed on the guest list, but someone had taken a pen and drawn a line straight through it. I stood there for a long moment, the hallway light casting a faint shadow across the card. My fingers tightened slightly at the edges. I didn't feel shock. I didn't feel hurt. What I felt was confirmation. A final, simple truth. They had never planned on including me unless I was useful to them. I closed the door quietly, holding the card in my hand. And for the first time, the silence in my home felt like freedom. I woke up on the morning of the wedding with an unexpected stillness in my chest. No tension, no dread, just a quiet, steady awareness that today wasn't mine to worry about. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and watched the early light stretch across my small living room. Outside, people were probably rushing, dressing, preparing for a celebration I had been crossed out from. Inside my home, everything felt calm. I sat at my table and opened the folder holding my documents. I read through each page again, not because I doubted them, but because it grounded me. These papers were the truth, my grandmother's truth, my protection, my voice, written in ink before I ever knew I would need it. Holding them made me feel less alone. While I was sorting them into a binder, my phone chimed. A message from Zara popped up first. "They're saying you're signing the house over this week," she wrote. "They're announcing it like it's already done." I stared at her words for a moment. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. It wasn't joy. It was something quieter, almost curious. How quickly people could rewrite reality when it served them. I texted her back. "I haven't agreed to anything." She replied with a simple, "I knew it." I placed my phone aside and continued organizing. I slipped the notarized transfer into a plastic sleeve, then the deed, then my grandmother's letter. My hands moved slowly and carefully, almost reverently, like I was stitching together pieces of my own spine. Sometime around noon, I closed the binder and set it on my coffee table. I leaned back on the couch and let the sunlight warm my legs. I imagined them at the ceremony, the flowers, the photos, the proud smiles they would wear. I wondered if any part of them felt the hollowness they had carved. Probably not. People who take from you rarely pause to notice what they remove. Another message buzzed. It was from an old coworker. "Heard you finally gave them the house. Guess that's a relief for everyone." I breathed out slowly, not angry, just amazed at how easily a lie could travel, and how none of them had bothered to check with me. I muted my phone and placed it face down again. I made myself lunch. I washed the dishes. I kept the day simple, because simplicity had never belonged to me before. I wanted to feel what it was like to exist without bending towards someone else's comfort. Around 3, my phone rang. A call this time. The screen lit up with one word, "Mom." I let it ring twice before answering. I pressed it to my ear and stayed silent. Her voice burst through the speaker, sharp and panicked. "The lawyer rejected Daniel's paperwork. What did you do?" I blinked at the wall. "Nothing," I said softly. "I didn't do anything." "You must have," she snapped. "He said the deed isn't in Daniel's name. They're saying the house isn't his to claim." "It isn't," I said. "It never was." A long silence followed. Not thoughtful silence, not even shocked silence. It was the silence of someone realizing they had built their plans on sand and expected me to keep them standing. She exhaled hard. "This looks terrible on our family, Sophie." I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. "I'm not responsible for how it looks." She tried again, her voice thinner. "Your brother is humiliated. He's at his wedding, Sophie. This is cruel." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Cruel," I repeated. The word felt strange in my mouth, heavy, misplaced. I protected what was mine. That's all. Before she could respond, I ended the call. I placed the phone next to me on the couch, my heartbeat steady. I didn't owe her an argument. I didn't owe her a justification. I didn't owe her anything. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. I lost track. I sat there listening to the soft hum of traffic outside and the faint sound of someone's TV from the apartment below. My mind wasn't racing, it wasn't spinning. It was quiet, like a lake with no wind. Then the silence shifted. My phone lit up again, this time with a stream of messages coming in all at once. Daniel's name filled the screen. I didn't open them, but I could see the preview texts. Short, angry, urgent. He didn't sound like someone celebrating. He sounded like someone scrambling. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the street below. A couple walked by holding hands. A delivery truck pulled into a driveway. Life kept moving, unaffected by the storm brewing miles away at a decorated venue filled with flowers and expectations. As I stood there, another message preview appeared on my screen, then another, and then the call came. I didn't pick it up. I just watched it ring until it stopped. A moment later, one final text appeared, sitting alone under the missed call notification. "I'm coming over." I stared at the words, feeling nothing but a steady breath moving in and out of my chest. And in that breath, I understood something simple and final. He wasn't leaving his wedding for me. He was leaving it for the house. For the first time in my life, the truth didn't hurt. It clarified. When Daniel burst through my door, I didn't stand up. I didn't flinch. I just watched him stumble inside in his full wedding suit, his hair flattened on one side like he had torn his hands through it on the drive over. His tie hung crooked, and the powder on his face was streaked like he had wiped away sweat and anger at the same time. The first thing out of his mouth was a sharp, breathless accusation. "Why did the lawyer refuse me?" I kept my voice low. "He didn't refuse you. The law did." He paced once, then stopped and stared at me as if trying to see who I really was for the first time. "Stop talking in circles, Sophie. Just tell me what you did." His tone cracked on the word did, like he had built an entire future on the assumption that I would fold just as easily as I always had. I reached for the binder on my coffee table. My hands were steady. I opened it and slid the notarized documents toward him. "This," I said, "is what protected me. Not anything I did today. Something that was done years ago." He snatched the papers and read the first page. His face fell so fast it looked like gravity had grabbed him by the jaw. She she left it to you," he whispered. I nodded. There was no pleasure in it, only truth. "She did. She wanted me to be safe." He kept reading, flipping through each page like the answers might change if he moved quickly enough. "But Mom said—" He stopped, breathing hard. A small tremor worked its way into one of his hands. "Why didn't anyone tell me she did this?" I took a breath. "Maybe you never asked. Maybe you assumed." He looked up, a flash of disbelief in his eyes. "You knew?" "I found out only recently," I said. "The letter was hidden in my things because Grandma knew how this would go. She trusted that one day I'd need protection from all of you." His mouth tightened. "Don't make this dramatic." "I don't have to," I said quietly. "It already is." Before he could speak again, heavy footsteps approached in the hallway. Then Amber appeared at my door in her wedding gown, veil pushed back, mascara smudged into thick shadows beneath her eyes. She looked like someone who had run through a storm. She didn't wait to be invited in. She stormed inside and pointed at me. "Fix this." I stayed seated. "There's nothing to fix." She let out a breathless laugh. "You ruined our wedding day over a house you don't even need." Daniel turned toward her, but she waved him off. Her eyes were locked on me. "You're doing this to spite us." "No," I said. "I'm doing this because it's mine." Amber stepped closer. "You've always made everything harder than it needs to be." The words landed with a familiar sting, not because they were new, but because they were old. They were the kind of line people used when they wanted your silence dressed as cooperation. I lifted my chin. "You kept the truth from me. You mocked me. You tried to take something I didn't even know I had. And now that I'm saying no, you're calling it difficult." Daniel rubbed his forehead, pacing again. "Sophie, listen. You don't understand how much planning we put into this. We need that house. Amber and I—" "You planned a future with something that wasn't yours," I said softly. "That's not my fault." He stopped pacing. He looked suddenly older, like disappointment had carved itself into his features. "I thought you would help us." "I did," I said. "For years. In every way that required me to shrink." Amber crossed her arms. "Oh, please. You're acting like a victim." "I'm acting like someone who finally knows the truth." For a moment, no one spoke. The room felt small, but not because of fear. It felt small because their confidence had nowhere left to go. I leaned forward slightly. "Grandma made sure I was protected because she saw something none of you ever bothered to see, that I needed stability, that I would be alone more often than not, that I didn't have the advantages Daniel grew up with." Daniel swallowed hard. "You didn't tell me about the letter." "You didn't tell me the house existed," I replied. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Amber stepped in again, her voice sharper than before. "You just cost us everything. Do you realize that? Daniel is humiliated out there. People are asking why he left his own wedding. You made him look bad. I met her eyes. He left because he prioritized property over vows. That wasn't my choice. Her face twisted. You think you're so righteous. You think anyone's going to believe you when we tell them how selfish you're being? That's your pattern, I said. You rewrite the story until it fits your needs. Amber walked closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. We will expose you, Sophie. We will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. I felt something settle in me then, a calm so deep it almost felt warm. I stood up slowly, leveling my gaze with hers. Do it, I said. I have nothing left to lose. Her expression faltered, just for a second. Daniel watched us both, speechless, the papers hanging weakly from his hand. And in that tiny crack of silence, I realized something simple and final. The truth wasn't the thing that shattered them. It was the moment I stopped being afraid of them at all. The fallout began before the sun came up. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating non-stop on the nightstand. Dozens of notifications stacked on the screen like a warning light. When I opened them, the first thing I saw was Amber's name splashed across a long, frantic post. She had written paragraphs calling me jealous, unstable, and petty, saying I had ruined her wedding out of spite. She even included a picture of herself crying in her gown. It was dramatic enough to belong on a stage, not a home screen. For a moment, I just stared at it. The words didn't sting the way they used to. They felt like recycled lines from every time I had ever been blamed for someone else's behavior. But then I saw the comments. They weren't what she expected. People were politely confused. Some were blunt. Why would a bride leave her ceremony to argue about a house that isn't hers? Why are you posting during your own wedding? This doesn't make sense. The disbelief rolled through the thread like a slow wave. I felt something shift inside me. Not pleasure, not triumph, just a quiet affirmation that reality had a way of surfacing, even when people tried to bury it. More messages came in, but these were private. A neighbor from the old house wrote, "Your grandmother always spoke so softly about you. She'd be proud." Then an old friend from school, "I don't know what's going on, but I'm on your side." A distant cousin I barely knew sent, "If they're attacking you, I believe you." I sat at my table reading each message slowly. For years, I thought people didn't see me. Now I realized I had just been surrounded by the wrong people. I wasn't invisible. I was ignored by choice, their choice. Around mid-morning, Daniel's texts started appearing. The first one said, "I shouldn't have yelled." The second, "We can talk this out." Then, "It's all getting blown out of proportion." Each message felt thinner than the last, like someone trying to cover a crack with a piece of tape. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to clarify. By noon, our parents called. I let it ring twice, then answered. My mother didn't waste time. "You've made this family look terrible, Sophie." Her voice was sharp, like she was stepping around her own embarrassment and blaming me for where the shards landed. I kept my tone steady. "I'm not responsible for anyone's choices but my own." She let out a scoff. "Do you even care how bad this looks on us?" "I care about truth," I said. Appearance was never my role in this family. There was a beat of silence, and for the first time I heard something fragile in her voice. Not apology, not understanding, just the faint disappointment of a person realizing they had lost their favorite scapegoat. She hung up without saying goodbye. I set the phone down and breathed out slowly. The air felt different, lighter, like something heavy had finally unclenched its grip from my chest. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. And that steadiness felt like strength. I had been building piece by piece without even noticing. I spent the afternoon at the inherited house. The sunlight filtered through the old lace curtains, warming the dust in the air. I opened the windows and let the breeze carry the room's stillness out into the yard. I painted the kitchen walls the same soft color I remembered from childhood. I scrubbed the counters until they shined. I found one of Grandma's old aprons tucked behind a drawer. I pressed it to my face, breathing in the faint smell of flour and lavender. As I worked, I felt a connection forming. one that wasn't about ownership or legality or conflict. It was about belonging, about remembering the one person who saw me without trying to reshape me. Repairing the house felt like repairing myself. One quiet stroke, one careful corner, one clean surface at a time. In the late afternoon, I stepped outside to breathe in the scent of the grass. For the first time in a long time, I felt grounded, present, real. Not the version of me my family had built to make themselves feel bigger. Just me, the woman who chose truth over approval. When I returned home, my phone lit up again. A few more apology texts from Daniel. A short message from my father saying, "This is unnecessary, Sophie." I didn't open them. Their words didn't hold the power they once did. Their disappointment no longer dictated my decisions. Losing their approval didn't feel like loss anymore. I made a small dinner. I washed the plate. I folded a blanket on the couch. I let the evening settle around me like calm water. Nothing dramatic, nothing heavy. Just life moving the way it should have always been allowed to move. Then, just as the sky darkened, one final notification blinked onto my screen. Amber. Her message read, "You will regret this." I stared at it for a long moment, the quiet settling deep into my chest. And for the first time, I realized she was wrong. I didn't regret a single thing. I didn't reply to Amber's message. I didn't let it echo in my mind the way similar threats used to. I simply set my phone aside and opened the windows of the inherited house, letting the cool evening air drift in. The space felt calmer every day, like it recognized me now, like it understood I wasn't here to prove anything. I was here to live. In the mornings, I focused on the garden. It had been wild for years, the flowers overgrown and tangled together. My grandmother used to spend hours here, pruning, watering, humming to herself. I remembered watching her hands move with so much care. When I picked up the old gardening tools, I felt closer to her than I had in a long time. I trimmed the vines, cleared the dead leaves, and planted new seedlings. The soil was rich. Every small change felt like a piece of my life settling back into place. By the end of the first week, the house felt less like a burden and more like a beginning. I realized I didn't need its value to validate me. I needed its peace. With the extra space upstairs, I decided to rent a room. It was a practical choice, a simple way to support myself without leaning on anyone. I cleaned out the guest room, painted the walls a soft cream, and opened the curtains so the light could spill in. When I posted the listing, the responses came quickly. People loved the quiet area, the warmth of the old home. It made me smile to know others could feel what I felt here. A woman named Elise moved in a week later. She was gentle, friendly, respectful of the space. We talked over tea in the evenings, sharing small stories about work and life. She told me she admired how calm I seemed, how grounded. I didn't tell her it came from tiredness, years of swallowing hurt. Instead, I just said thank you and let the words sit softly between us. It felt good to have someone see me without expecting anything from me. My days found a rhythm. I worked, I fixed things, I rested, I cooked simple meals, I walked through the garden at dusk. Neighbors began stopping by, offering help or asking if I needed anything. They told me stories about my grandmother, how kind she had been, how she had always welcomed people with open arms. I hadn't known she was so loved. Hearing it felt like a blessing placed gently in my hands. Meanwhile, the noise on the other side of my life kept getting louder. I heard from Zara that Daniel and Amber's reputation was still unraveling. The wedding disaster had spread farther than they expected. People questioned why they were so fixated on taking something that wasn't theirs. Amber's online rant had made things worse. Her job apparently issued a warning, saying her public behavior didn't match their standards. I didn't celebrate any of it. I didn't need to. Life was simply correcting its balance. Zara told me Daniel looked exhausted lately, snapping at people, arguing with Amber in front of friends, blaming stress for everything. Their families were frustrated too. The narrative had shifted. They weren't victims anymore. They were the architects of their own fallout. And I wasn't involved. For the first time in years, their chaos didn't reach me. I watched from a distance, not with bitterness, but with relief. I kept moving forward. I woke early, made coffee, tended the garden, helped Elise with groceries when her car broke down. I focused on things that felt real, things that fed my spirit instead of draining it. I started keeping a journal, writing down small moments that made me smile. A neighbor leaving fresh herbs at my door. Elise laughing so hard she spilled tea on the table. A bluebird landing on the fence near the roses. These were the kinds of things I wanted my life to be made of. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I would sit in the living room and imagine my grandmother watching me. I imagined her nodding gently, as if to say, "You're finally choosing yourself." I wondered if she had known this day would come, if she had left me the house not to give me something, but to free me from something else. That thought always left a warm ache in my chest. The more peaceful my life became, the more the distance between me and my family grew. Daniel sent a few stiff messages here and there. "Can we talk? This has gotten out of hand. You should have told us sooner." Each one felt like a rope thrown from a sinking ship. I didn't grab any of them. I didn't need to. I wasn't the one drowning. One evening, after a long day in the garden, I settled onto the couch with a cup of mint tea. The house smelled like clean air and fresh soil. Elise was out with friends. The sky outside was turning soft pink. Everything felt steady, quiet, safe. That was when my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Just one. I pressed play. Daniel's voice came through, low and shaky. "I made a mistake," he whispered. "I need help." I sat still, listening to the silence that followed. The words didn't pull me back. They just hung in the air, fragile and unfamiliar. And in that moment, I realized something simple and profound. Needing me was not the same as valuing me. I replayed Daniel's voicemail only once. His whisper sat heavy in the room, but I didn't rush to call him back. I let the silence decide for me. By the next morning, I had watered the garden, brewed my coffee, and opened the windows before I heard the knock on my door. It wasn't frantic this time. It was slow and tired, like someone knocking with the weight of their own choices. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there alone. His eyes were red, his hair uncombed, his shirt wrinkled as if he had slept in it. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at me with a lost kind of sadness, the kind that comes after every excuse has finally run out. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. His voice cracked on the word. "I messed up, Sophie. I really messed up." I didn't answer right away. I stepped aside so he could walk in. He moved slowly, like each step cost him something. He stood in the living room, staring at the floor as if he was scared to look at me directly. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said. "I didn't think you cut us off. I thought you just needed time." I sat down on the edge of the couch, keeping my tone steady. "I didn't cut anyone off, Daniel. I stepped away from being treated like I didn't matter." He winced like the truth stung. Maybe it did. Maybe it should. He sank into the chair across from me, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. "Everything's falling apart," he whispered. "People won't talk to us. Amber's furious with me. Mom says I've ruined the family. I don't know what to do anymore." I felt a flicker of sympathy, but it didn't pull me back into old habits. Not this time. I wasn't his bandage anymore. Wasn't the person who swallowed my own hurt, just to keep the peace. He lifted his head slowly. "I need you," he said. "I know you don't believe me, but I do. I need my sister." I let his words settle. There was truth in his fear, but not in his remorse. He wanted comfort, not accountability. He wanted me to be the same quiet shadow I had always been. I couldn't go back to that place, not even for him. "I hear you," I said softly, "and I care about you, Daniel. I always have. But I can't be part of that family anymore. Not the way it is." His mouth opened slightly, like he wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. Instead, his shoulders slumped. I watched the realization move through him piece by piece, the understanding that the bridge he'd crossed could not be unburned. "I was stupid," he said. His voice shook. I thought the house should be mine. I thought you wouldn't do anything with it. I thought you'd give it up like you always gave everything up. My chest ached, but I didn't flinch. That was the problem, I said. You thought I existed to make things easier for you. He closed his eyes. A tear slipped down his cheek. I'm sorry, he whispered again. I wish I could take it all back. I forgive you, I said. The words came out calm and honest. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to what hurt me. He looked at me then, really looked, and I watched the truth land in his eyes. I wasn't angry. I wasn't cold. I wasn't punishing him. I was done. Completely, quietly done. He stood up slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. So that's it? He asked. Not harsh, not accusing, just tired. That's it, I said. You have your life. I have mine. And this time I'm choosing mine. He nodded. The smallest, saddest nod I had ever seen from him. He walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. I never meant to lose you, he said without turning around. You didn't lose me, I replied. You let go of me long before today. He left without another word. His steps down the porch were slow, uneven. I heard his car door close. I heard the engine start. I didn't look out the window. I didn't chase the moment. I just sat there, letting the quiet settle in my chest like warm air. After a while, I stepped outside. The evening light stretched across the yard, soft and golden. The garden rustled gently in the breeze. I sat on the porch steps with my hands resting on my knees, breathing in the scent of soil and roses. Sadness sat with me, but it wasn't heavy. It wasn't choking. It felt honest. It felt earned. And beneath it, there was something deeper, something still and peaceful, a kind of quiet I had never known before. I reached into my pocket and felt the cool metal of my grandmother's key. I held it up, watching the light catch on its worn edges. It felt steady in my palm. It felt like truth. I whispered, I finally found home. I woke up the next morning with a kind of stillness I didn't recognize at first. It wasn't the heavy quiet that used to follow a family fight. It wasn't the tense silence I learned to live inside for years. This was something softer. It felt like a breath I didn't know I'd been waiting to release. For the first time in a long time, nothing in me felt pulled or torn or small. I made tea and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, the kind that brushes against your skin gently, almost like a greeting. I watched the light stretch across the yard and settle on the garden beds. The roses had opened fully overnight, wide and bright, just the way my grandmother loved them. Standing there, I felt her presence in a way that didn't ache anymore. It warmed me instead. I thought about everything that brought me here. The lies, the pressure, the way I kept trying to squeeze myself into a family that never made space for me. For years, I told myself I was keeping the peace. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid that if I stopped trying, I would lose them completely. It took all of this to understand. I never really had them to begin with. Not in any way that mattered. I sipped my tea and let that truth settle. It didn't hurt now. It just was. Revenge was never the goal. I see that so clearly now. I didn't want to ruin Daniel or embarrass Amber or tear down my parents. I only wanted to reclaim the pieces of myself I kept giving away. The house wasn't the victory. The house was the reminder that someone, at least one person, saw value in me long before I learned to see it in myself. My grandmother never raised her voice. She never lectured. She simply lived in a way that made people feel safe. I didn't understand the power of that until I began choosing people who didn't offer me even a fraction of the same kindness. Now, as I stand in her doorway every morning, I understand what she left me. It wasn't the property. It was a path out. I looked down at the porch floorboards she once sanded herself and smiled. I'm trying, I whispered, as if she could hear me. I really am. Later, I walked through the garden, touching the petals lightly. I noticed how naturally my steps slowed. I wasn't rushing anywhere. I wasn't bracing for anything. The quiet no longer felt like a warning. It felt like peace. A kind of peace that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval or apology. I thought about Daniel's face when he left yesterday. The way his shoulders fell as if a weight had finally landed on him after years of hovering above his head. There was a time I would have run after him, desperate to fix his pain, terrified of being the reason he hurt. But I didn't move this time. And standing there in the garden now, I finally understood why. Love without respect isn't love. It's duty dressed as devotion. And I'm done living like that. I walked back inside and sat at the table with the old envelope of papers my grandmother left me. They didn't feel heavy anymore. They felt like a blessing. I set them aside and let my hands rest flat on the wood. I breathed slowly and felt my own strength settle into place, calm and firm. I realized I wasn't alone in this journey. So many people watching this story, listening to these moments, carrying their own wounds from families who didn't know how to love them right. They've walked beside me without even knowing my face. It humbles me. It comforts me too. If you've stayed with me through all this, thank you. Truly. Healing can feel lonely, but it never is when someone chooses to witness your truth. If my voice has meant something to you, if my story has echoed something inside you, I'm grateful that you're here. And if you want to stay for more stories like this, your presence means more than you know. As the afternoon light shifted, I sat on the porch again. I watched the sky fade into softer shades. The world felt gentle, almost like it was holding its breath with me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt whole, quietly, steadily whole. It took losing a family to find myself. It took standing alone to understand the kind of love I deserved. And it took this house, this memory, this moment to teach me that peace doesn't come when others change. Peace comes when I stop shrinking to fit the people who never saw me fully. I ran my fingertip over the edge of my grandmother's key, where the metal had worn smooth. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight settle into me, calm and certain. "This is home," I whispered, "not because it's mine, but because I finally am." And for the first time in my life, I believed it.